So thanks again. I hope you had a great time in your breakout session. We had a lot of interesting ideas that came up in my session, and we're going to have a little bit, as I mentioned, a little bit of recommendation speed dating. But to kick us off for this final session, before everyone comes up and sort of pitches their idea to Deborah, to Pramod, and to the rest of you who are with us, one last video for the day. In some ways, we could have started with this video, but I think it's also a nice way to help us wrap up and to pull our thoughts together. Why does this initiative matter? What are we trying to accomplish? So just a quick 2 minutes here, a short video actually of Deborah that we filmed. Sorry. And then we'll bring up Pramod and Deborah.
Well, one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years is that innovation's gone global, and that it is truly a global enterprise where all nations are competing to lead, yes, in discovery and in invention, but very importantly, translating those assets into high-value goods and services that command a premium in the marketplace. So we have a global imperative for innovation as one of the great changes over the last 10 years. For the Council on Competitiveness to be partnering with the National Science Foundation really underscores that you have a private sector leadership group of industry leaders, university presidents, laboratory directors, labor leaders, teaming with the organization that really has the core responsibility to ensuring that we're going to lead in scientific discovery and scientific application to create value. Well, you know, 10 years ago, the U.S. was really in the forefront of the IT revolution that underpinned so much of our productivity growth during that period. But now that is just one of the enabling building blocks. And what's very exciting is that we have these four technological, scientific revolutions that are disruptive, and they're colliding and they're converging. So, you know, an example to share with you is you could say that the IT, biotechnology, nanotechnology, cognitive technology revolutions are rewriting the world in digital code, genetic code, atomic code, and neural code. And coming together in these complex systems, we're going to create value and new businesses, new ways of doing things that we can't even fathom today. So that's the frontier, and it's very, very exciting.
So I think one of the ways that we hope to explore this frontier is to really hear back from you. So first of all, before we even start, I want to thank everyone who's agreed to stand up and share their ideas. I'd like to ask Deborah and Pramod to join us. They're going to, in some sense, receive those ideas and I think perhaps provide any real-time feedback or impressions that you might have. But this is really meant to be a quick session. Our first respondent is going to be Carolyn Stevens. Carolyn is the Director of Strategic Marketing and Operations at UC Irvine's Institute for Innovation. So, Carolyn, if you don't mind raising your hand, someone will bring a mic over to you. Oh, here we go.
Should we bring Bud up to sit here too?
He's on a phone call.
Thank you. Well, we had a relatively robust conversation in the first morning session. A number of different concepts that came to play, and there were three strands that we decided to report on. One of them, and Chad nicely wrote them for me. I was in part of Chad's group and almost large enough for me to read them without my glasses. Thank you for the attempt, but not quite. Sad to say. The first piece was related to I-Corps and the interest in expanding and scaling the I-Corps program, both from a scale, meaning actually for, in some cases, maybe smaller compartmentalized programs. I can reflect on a version of that we used our node locally at University of Southern California. We ran what's termed a ZAP program, which was a modified portion, really phenomenal program, just a couple of days, over a couple of weeks, and had great success with that. So I can highly endorse the scaling system, and the expansion is potentially, I think, Ohio State. There was discussion that the state of Ohio partnered and teamed with the I-Corps program to try to share a little bit more in the expansion of the program. The second piece was in metrics. What's a day without a metric was our theme, and it was looking at if STEM, graduating more capable STEM humans. One of the questions is, how are we measuring that? And clearly there was a discussion that within the rating and ranking systems in the university structure today, or the reporting agencies, there's some level of metric, but a focus on grad rates and understanding retention of a more diverse group, consistent with our discussion this morning, was definitely a strong point. And the third was looking at the mentoring and role modeling that was also covered in our afternoon session, that there was a discussion that it's in some cases maybe more regionally or more locally difficult to find the match demographic component, but it's critically important that we need to potentially look at a more national drive to ensuring that we have the role models that can go into the schools, whether it be K through 12 or upper. I mean, we were focused clearly on the university setting, but really early and often, and how to expand that particular piece rather than just letting it leave to maybe just a region. It's a little difficult. I know I hopefully I covered that and tried to keep with the rate of speed that keep us moving. I stand between us and the airport, I think.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Sure.
Deborah, Pramod, I don't know if there are any reactions, not necessary, but if there's anything that struck you.
Well, certainly scaling of I-Core is very important to NSF. We resonate with that idea. We are working on it constantly. I just had a meeting with the nodes last week on this topic. Your comment on measuring sort of competencies or how well we are doing in terms of retention and what we are teaching STEM graduates at the university level. I think it's a very important recommendation. I think it's also a difficult one because this is not something that's easily done. But I think NSF is actually a good place to start thinking on this, because we do fund a lot of education research out of our EHR directorate and also out of engineering directorate. So, I mean, we will think about that idea and see what can be done with respect to sort of measuring, finding the right metrics, if you will. And the third idea of I mean, it's absolutely critical, mentoring and role models. And I don't have a sort of immediate reaction, but one thought that occurs to me is leveraging information technology and social networks and things of that nature to really address the big need that's there with few resources that we have.
I would just add, we also had some discussion about how important it is for graduate students as well as undergraduates to have the opportunity to understand and be mentored by potential industry partners and employers, that not everyone is going to go, for an academic career path, and that there is a disconnect between the mentoring of the leadership in universities with the real world opportunities and experiences for going into industry as well.
Great. Thanks, Pramod. Thanks, Deborah. Our second report out, Mike Vandersloot, Vice President, Council on Competitiveness, representing Alan Tatel's group from this morning.
Thank you, Chad.
3 minutes.
So we started out the conversation around models of innovation to build on the plenary sessions, and the conversation quickly turned to manufacturing, very quickly. And in fact, Director Cordova reminded us that Nobel Prizes are increasingly going to folks that can actually make things. So we focused on what we can do to begin to bring back the manufacturing sector, not old manufacturing, but next generation manufacturing, and bring back that informational feedback loop between the manufacturing process and innovation. So we had a VC heavy group, so we focused a lot on finance models and just kind of identifying the fact that the VC model doesn't really match the CapEx needs of manufacturers, and that the federal government doesn't really have the mandate to scale manufacturing plants. So there's a gap there that needs to be filled. Talent, Deborah, you just mentioned vocational ed, and I think so to make a unique recommendation, I think we all know that's important, but we identified that there's a bit of a stigma around vocational education in that it's a second best option to going to a 4-year and then on to a graduate degree. So I think that's an important, maybe a messaging campaign that we need to undertake. And the general comment that we need to stay away from commoditized manufacturing and efficiency gains in manufacturing. Focusing on innovation and technologies that are truly disruptive, that takes us outside, that moves us away from our competitors. And so the second part of the morning plenary was this idea of an inclusive innovation ecosystem, and certainly a lot of conversation around the cost of higher education. That's becoming very burdensome. So we need to identify and scale education models that bend the cost curve down to allow more Americans access to the higher education system, and to make sure they're not saddled with debt coming out of their education degrees. And this idea around how do you attract innovation resources to an area that doesn't necessarily have them or doesn't have a historical path in that particular space. And we happen to have Hala from the Metro Chamber, and she built on conversations in our group around coordinated, multi-stakeholder regional planning, truly public-private partnerships that take stock of what resources the region has, and then how do you create a strategic plan to begin to leverage those resources and attract resources to the region.
Thanks, Mike. Maybe in the interest of time, Promoted Deborah, unless you have a burning, we can move to the third and maybe do a catch-up from the morning session. So Paul Sandberg's next. I can take the mic over. Thanks, Paul.
Well, we had a great group, like all the others were, and we had 3 pages of notes, and so let me get down to the 3 areas that we thought, and a couple of them overlap, which would be typical. But I think the biggest focus was how to develop an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship. That this needed to have a premise that we have to move beyond. Here's a quote from one of the people. We have to move beyond thinking there's one person that will come in and make it work. And that we need to really have key participants in the school systems for K-12, universities, government, industry, and there needs to be this fourth dimension where we're really working together and kind of pushing the envelope on each of these. The action item really was educate, provide incentive for financial and human investment in these types of ecosystems, invest in trainees, reward young inventors with incentives and prizes, focus on mentors, which we heard, and create more role models. That there aren't, in these areas, especially in schools and universities, there aren't a lot of role models. There's a lot of role models for more academic things, but not for these. The other one I thought was interesting was consider the social and nonprofit impact of what we're doing. The premise, again, move beyond the idea of just making money. That key participants really were underrepresented communities and cultures. The action item was encouragement for action and programs to address diversity in regards to race, age, gender, background. The locations, again, that came up, that there's a lot of communities all over the country, and to focus on those, whether they be partnering with counties for having small startups like many do, incubators or others. Intellectual capital, et cetera. Again, the point here is make sure all regions are involved, because everybody, we're here to really help the U.S. So another one was kind of a formal thing, was pursue patents, licensing, commercialization practices to the greatest extent practical, maximizing on further development use, but also on the beneficial social impact of their technologies. And so that message again on social entrepreneurship, on a nonprofit as well, was kind of come out of our group a bit. So.
Great, thank you, Paul. Deborah, Pramod, any quick reactions from the final 2 report outs from this morning?
So let me just talk about advanced manufacturing, because that was a big topic. And I know that President Peterson served on advanced manufacturing partnership that President Obama appointed to advise him. NSF is one of highest priorities for NSF to fund advanced manufacturing research. So we are in the basic research space. It's a high priority for engineering directorate. We are funding things that will be important in the next 5 to 10 years. Things like cyber manufacturing, scalable nano manufacturing, advanced biomanufacturing, cellular therapies, and cellular manufacturing. So we are kind of breaking ground on things that will be very important in the coming years. And then we participate with other federal agencies like Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and others in sort of the total federal government investment in advanced manufacturing, such as manufacturing institutes that are coming up. I think there are 8 of these, and NSF is participating in many of them. One final point that AMP 2.0 came up with was creating a public-private mechanism to advise federal government on investing in advanced manufacturing space. And NSF took the lead on that, and we have a joint activity with NIST. And there is a call for proposals out there right now to create such a consortium that can advise the federal government from university and industry sectors as to how the federal government can invest in the advanced manufacturing space. So I think we are being pretty responsive in the advanced manufacturing arena.
I'll just build on what Pramod has said, and many of you know in this room, because some of you are actively engaged with the council, but that was one of the issues that really came out of the 2004 National Innovation Initiative. We looked at 2 issues that were the emerging frontiers, one being the transformation of manufacturing and energy. So, we have a major effort underway to both help roll out, the manufacturing agenda across many sectors, but also integrating that with what's happening in energy. So really that connection of the two. So in our great partnership with NSF and other parts of the government, I think the systems integration that needs to occur here is very important. So we're going to continue this conversation, and I hope Pramod and Dr. Cordova will participate, but on September 16th, in Washington, there'll be the 3rd American Energy Manufacturing Competitiveness Summit that Secretary Moniz of Energy will be co-hosting with the council. And what we're talking about here, we'll make sure that all of that is embedded as well. So there are lots of agendas moving forward, and at the heart of all of them is this innovation capacity.
Great, thanks, Deborah and Pramod. Our next report is actually coming from David Norton. I'll pass the mic on. Vice President for Research at the University of Florida. David, it's over to you.
Chad, thank you. We had a lively discussion. I'll actually cover 3 points. One was added to it in the hallway, Chad, so I got cornered with 2. The first was a sort of a general observation that disruptive innovation often comes through projects that have high risk and a fairly high probability of not being successful and failure. And having an ecosystem that allows failure, that encourages failure early, and facilitates that as a learning experience so that the participants understand why it failed under controlled consequences so that they live to fight another day is important if we're going to drive an economy towards really that leading edge innovation. The second is in the same vein that there are agencies, at least 2, that encourage fund projects that have high risk, high payoff. And the most obvious example is DARPA within the Department of Defense. There are other agencies such as NIH which are much more conservative in their funding, and they're not amenable to funding projects that have high risk. You almost have to show that we'll be successful before they'll fund you. So as a recommendation, looking at other mission-driven agencies as to whether having a DARPA-like mechanism would be useful so that we are at the cutting edge of innovation in those other areas. And the third, which I got cornered in the hall, is just a reminder that innovation is not the exclusive domain of startups.
Yes.
But that companies foster and often are the leaders in significant innovations that have a disruptive impact.
Thanks, David. Would you mind sharing the microphone with Donna Crawford, who's just next to you? Donna is the Associate Director at Lawrence Livermore and is our next respondent.
Okay, thank you very much. So, our topic was about growing new markets to improve prosperity. And we talked initially about, usually when you're growing new markets, you want to look at some problem that you're trying to solve. And one of the problems that we have is actually, we in this room are sort of on the upper end of the spectrum in STEM and creating innovation and business and so on, but there's a very, very large sector of the population that are not engaged and not involved. And so our what we would recommend, I think, is to formulate some kind of ecosystem to incentivize or enable the non-tech savvy people to actually become entrepreneurs. And some of those things exist, and you just mentioned one, David. So, and they could actually then maybe even become our next middle class. Obviously, that needs access to capital. We talked about some very elaborate schemes, and I'm sorry, Suresh, I'm not going to go into any details about the kind of banking programs that we could put together. Of course, there are things like Kickstarter, and Tomas just told me about Quirk, and so there are many other systems out there that could provide access to capital. And we also need access to education. I know this has come up several times, but the quote in our session was, "We do a good job of educating the good student. We do a terrible job of educating the average student." And so we need, and this idea that we let go shop classes and home ec classes where you would have a hands-on, you knew whether you had an aptitude and you got excited because you actually did something, you made something, you created something, and so maybe that would incentivize you then later to go on and become an entrepreneur. There were a couple of ideas around that. One was, teach the teachers. We need to be able to educate the average student, and we need teachers that are going to inspire those average students, and we're talking K-12 at this point. Our university system's fabulous. And we also need, and then the other idea was community colleges free, and which should include sort of vocational kinds of things. So that's all around actually one topic, which was putting together systems to incentivize the non-tech savvy, the non-STEM folks to become the entrepreneurs. Then we went to the other end of the spectrum, and we talked about the United States making strategic bets for the future. Big strategic bets, recognizing the global realities, that other countries don't have any problem with industrial policies and investing billions of dollars in their industries. Again, we didn't put down what those exactly should be, but needs to be a public-private partnership so that we don't get mired in regulations, especially not too soon. But the big bets, Deborah mentioned the four, IT, bio, nano, cognitive, but we mentioned things that are really too big for any one company to take on their own, things like the smart grid. Things like water purification, water desalinization, spectrum allocation so that Netflix doesn't own it all, things like that. So make a few big bets and have the right investments. We don't necessarily have the stomach for that, but it certainly should be a recommendation that we think should come from the council. And then something we've heard over and over again, it's in the clarion call, but we would be remiss if we just didn't say it again. We have to stop educating foreign nationals and sending them home. So let's stamp a green card to their diploma. Let's keep them here. Let's keep them in our workforce.
Thanks, Donna. If Promoda and Deborah, if you don't mind, we'll maybe ask Mohammed to give his final and then concluding remarks. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Mohammed. Mohammed Zaidi, former CTO, Alcoa, distinguished fellow of the council.
So in the context of creating new markets, new jobs, and economic growth, we had a very lively discussion, and we have 3 points to report. First one, which a number of the other groups said, is a need to foster models and provide mentorship in underrepresented communities. And then a big bet, which would be to develop and proliferate low-cost, easy-to-use self-organizing tools in multiple sectors, such as energy, healthcare, water, transportation for future competitive events. And the third point was innovation around local issues can be very effective, build systems to leverage best practices.
Great. Thanks, Mohammed. Pramod, Deborah, any final remarks, reflections on those comments?
Well, I think those were a very rich set of comments and recommendations, and I don't think I can cover all of them. I want to just offer one example of how I think things are changing in a really interesting way, which can address at least some of the questions that came up. And that's the maker movement. So the maker movement is just spreading like wildfire. Just to give you an example, last year, President Obama hosted a White House maker fair, and I got involved in that to bring engineering colleges to the table by making a pledge to the president in terms of using maker spaces in a variety of ways in the admissions process as freshman projects, senior design projects. And we started off with less than 10 universities signed up to do that. And by the time we were done, there were more than 150 universities all across this nation pledging to the president that they would adopt the maker stuff into their whole process. And I know that Georgia Tech has just a marvelous maker space right here on your campus.
Actually, I'll comment, Partha was at the White House and presented his Better Crutch to President Obama, and Jasmine is going, when, Jasmine?
On Friday. Yeah, right.
Wow. Wow.
That's part of the second major.
Yeah, so the second one is on Friday. So, yeah. So the point of all that long story is to say that this whole idea of democratization of innovation and creativity and so forth, I think the maker revolution kind of offers an example of how something really can involve a lot more people into that process than has been traditionally the case. So I'll just stop there with my comments.
Great. I want to thank all of the folks who volunteer to report out from the breakout groups. Pramod, Deborah, thank you very much. Deborah, I'm going to ask you to stay. I'm going to ask President Peterson and Chancellor Wilcox to join you for our concluding remarks. Thank you.
Before I leave, can I just
Please.
offer a word of thanks to all my colleagues at Council on Competitiveness, people at Georgia Tech and the Metro Atlanta region. And I want to thank my own colleagues from NSF, Grace Wong and Sohi Rastekar, who've done just enormous amount of work to make this initiative possible. So just please join me in thanking them.
So I think I'll go ahead and start off. It's been an interesting day. I think back a little bit to what happened 10 years ago when the Council on Competitiveness talked about innovation and the things that were important. Three of the things that they talked about were talent, creativity, and initiative. And I think those things hold true today. We've had some interesting discussions, kind of taken a new look at where we are and where we might want to go. I will say that one of the things I've been saying for a number of years when I was at Colorado before I came to Georgia Tech, you know, in the 50s, the United States lost the steel industry. We had helped Japan modernize their steel industry, and we said, well, that's okay. It went offshore. That's okay. We've got automobile manufacturing. And then in the 60s and 70s, we saw that kind of go offshore, and we said, well, that's all right. We've got electronics. And chip manufacturing. And so that's gone offshore now a little bit. And I think if there's one thing that's going to help us as a country, one thing that's going to be the future for what we're doing, it's going to be innovation. But we have to be very creative and aggressive about how we do that, because 20 years from now, you can bet that some of the other international competitors that we have, China and India, are going to figure out how to move into this innovation space, and we're going to be competing with them in a way that's very different from what we are today. I want to thank all of you for being here. It was a real honor to host this with Mike Cassidy and Hala as they served as co-hosts. We were pleased to have you all here. I hope that you get a chance to see a little bit of the campus. And the one thing I'd say to innovators, maybe indicative of some of the things that are going on here on campus, but one thought I might leave you with is you can't always get what you want, but if you try real hard, you get what you need.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, President Peterson. And just all of us, we have been so thrilled to be here today at Georgia Tech, and just for the tremendous hospitality of you and your staff, and to have Wayne Clough with us as well, really the bookends of the past and where we're headed into the future, and having his brilliance back as well. But your leadership has really made a tremendous difference. And to hear our two young innovators today and what they've created was very inspirational. So you both added a lot to our discussion. So I want to now introduce Chancellor Wilcox from Riverside, University of California, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. You know, I think everybody has your bio in the book, and so in the interest of time, I'm just going to say you're leading one of our biggest public universities in a very important part of the country. So we're excited about joining you, and would love to hear your thoughts and where you're going to take us on the journey.
Well, good. I don't know about that, but let me do a few things. First, thanks to the council, thanks to NSF. I know Francis gone. Certainly thanks to Georgia Tech and to Georgia Research Alliance and Hala, who's gone as well. This has been a great meeting. Really do appreciate the chance to participate. And I'm going to, I don't know if this is president disease or not, but I had the same kind of inclination to think a little bit historically about what the world has been and what it is today. I go back to the 50s and 60s. If we had had a meeting like this then, we'd have been talking about infrastructure, roads and bridges and airports. Eisenhower built the interstate highway system to move us ahead, because the world then, for us, was bounded by our national borders, was raw materials in some parts of the country, manufacturing hubs in other parts of the country, and consumption centers other places. So we had to knit it together to make things thrive. And now we jump ahead to today, and we now don't talk about those things. Today we talked a little bit about bandwidth. We need more bandwidth. A little bit about 3D printers, but most of the day was about people. It was about talent. It was about management talent and technical talent. It was about anthropologists and biologists. It was about engineers and social scientists. It was about senior professionals and junior professionals. It was about trying to bring people together in new ways, and it was about relationships between and among all those people, as well as among the institutions that they're part of. How do we get corporations and universities and development operations and the rest to think differently? So how do we make this change from that kind of hubs around the country that we need to connect together to vitalize ourselves to this world where we talk about people, not things? Well, interestingly, we tie things together. The internet now is ubiquitous. Every one of us is in different countries, different weeks of the year, and on the phone and internet. We've changed supply chain. There's a virtual warehouse. We really are kind of an international web. Universities have campuses other places, and Carnegie Mellon has a campus in Silicon Valley. There aren't those clear demarcations regionally that we had 50 years ago, which is great. But now, ironically, we spent much of today talking about creating regional ecosystems. We're trying now to create our own regional identities in this very diffuse milieu that's global. And so that's an interesting way to think about it, and it brings up two possible solutions to this reality. One, each region is trying to get a competitive advantage, right? We're trying to find a way to be Cambridge. We're trying to find a way to be Austin, Texas. We're trying to find a way to make us special in this new world. But there's a more altruistic version of that, and that is we have this new world, and we're all simultaneously trying to optimize it. And we don't know exactly how to optimize it except in ways that we can see locally. We can look people in the eye and work with them locally. Now, the altruistic one is a rising tide raises all boats, and we can optimize this whole new system and everybody be better off. But we are Americans, we are capitalists, we all want our region to be a bigger boat. So we're kind of doing both at the same time and not sure which is which. So when I think about the future and the kinds of questions to ask, I want to put it in a kind of a bigger international frame. The other observation I'd make is a tension that I don't have an easy resolution to. One of the things that follows from this discussion of trying to create our regional ecosystems is the notion of strategic partnerships. We heard a lot of people today talk about strategic partnerships, and really for most of us what that means is we're not going to try to connect to 30 places. We're going to narrow it down to the ones we think are the best for us. So it's really an exclusionary kind of notion. Let's find and then really bore in on those to optimize. That's great if you're in the preferred set. So right now, our stated goal is to diversify and be more inclusive in the world. So bring in more women, bring in more students of color, underrepresented areas of the country. I'm guessing if you went to the top 50 corporations in America, looked at their 5 or 6 or 10 university strategic partners, You'd find Georgia Tech on lots of them. You'd find Carnegie Mellon on lots of them. You probably wouldn't find Cleveland State or the University of Texas at El Paso on very many, if any of them. So if we're really serious about optimizing the pool of talent, we have to think about that. And as an outspoken advocate for strategic partnership and an even more outspoken advocate of inclusion, I'm not sure how to square that circle. But that's, in the notion of trying to optimize the entire web, it seems to me that's a place that the council and the NSF and others could help us think about how to do both those things at the same time. It's been for me, it's been a great day to listen to lots of people with smart ideas and then spend a little bit of time thinking about a context in which we can all try to move ahead, not just locally, but in a more integrated way. So thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. President?
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
So I want to thank again our host and really thank our colleagues from NSF, Pramod and Grace and Soti. We've all worked very, very hard on this. It has been a co-creation. And of course, Chad Evans and Mike Vandersloot and Rachel and the whole team at the Council on Competitiveness. We are honored to be your partners, and I have to say, we've worked nonstop really on both the intellectual ideas for this, but also, for all of you coming and giving your time and spending so much of your precious energy with us has meant a lot. And, this is a journey, and this is the first stop along the way. Journey has a beginning, but it's not going to have an end in this case. So while we're moving across the country, we're going to network what we're doing here with all of our other parallel activities. And I hope you all do too. The things you're working on that you see have a connection with the Exploring Frontiers of Innovation, to please engage on that. And I just want to echo a little bit of what you said about the importance of this historically, but also that the time is so important for this initiative, because we are moving in now to a presidential campaign. It's kind of already underway. And one of the things we're very proud at the Council on Competitiveness, and we work very hard vigilantly to maintain this, is that we want the agenda that we lead and co-create with you to be the agenda for the country, not the agenda for any political party or any one set of interests, but the overall interest. And because that's so important, we all have a responsibility to really get engaged here on what we need to do. We know, of course, we have to be extremely active through all of our dimensions on this whole issue about the federal investment in research and development, particularly the basic research. When you look at the numbers, they're bad numbers for our country, and we really can't let that stay the same. So, that's something among many other policy issues we need to work on, but also we need to mobilize our communities, because at the end of the day, it's where people live and where they have their families and where they do their work where change really occurs. And we can all go back to our communities and be real agents for change. I thought just, for a few closing comments, I was playing with this. I love alliteration. So, we have the Exploring Frontiers of Innovation initiative. So I took the letter E, and I think it kind of captures all the things we need to do here. So if you bear with me for a minute, I will just use this alliteration to close our meeting. And again, I want to thank not just Georgia Tech, but the Research Alliance, Mike Cassidy and Hala, and all the things that you've done to make this happy and successful. So we have to embark and explore. We have to examine and expose. We have to excite and encourage. We have to embrace and entertain. We have to educate and experience. We have to equip. We have to erect, and we have to earn. We have to enable the extremes. We have to energize an exponential expansion of our nation's innovation ecosystem. And we have to engineer an ever-emerging, expanding 21st century entrepreneurial economy, also at the exascale.
So I cannot believe you got that off that piece of paper. I'm looking at this and I'm going, whoa.
So,
Well,
thank
listen,
you.
thank you for being here. It's been an exciting day. Glad to have all of you here, and and wish you safe journeys and safe travels. And you can get satisfaction.
We hope tonight in these high heels.
Very well done.
Thank you.
Ken? Yes. Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here.